From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Happy New Year, and welcome to the first Capital Chats podcast of 2026. And thanks as always to Spectrum for sponsoring this production. This is Joshua Irvin with WisPolitics. Today, we're sharing part of a conversation I had with Representative Shae Sortwell. He is a Republican representing Two Rivers, including Wisconsin's only active nuclear power plant, and a leading advocate for expanding nuclear power in Wisconsin. We spoke about his bill to incentivize new nuclear development in Wisconsin, what's helped legislators get on board with nuclear power, and how his bill addresses ratepayers' concerns about rising energy bills as data centers drive up power demand in the state.
Why does a utility need a tax credit to build a nuclear power plant in Wisconsin?
Yeah, so as I said, there are several parts to the bill, but the thing about nuclear power is it's very expensive on the front end to construct it. There's a lot of costs that go in on the front end of nuclear power. If all we want to do is find additional power of some type, you could build another coal plant. You could build a natural gas plant. You could put up wind and solar, although that's not as cheap without some of the tax subsidies that were there before. But all of those have issues related to them. And for different reasons, whether it's political reasons, scientific problems, reliability problems, each one of these different other power sources that we could have different concerns. Nuclear power is very reliable. It's once the plant is constructed, operation of the plant is quite inexpensive, and it's very, very safe. And for my conservationist friends, it's green. It produces no emissions, no carbon emissions, and so it has that positive as well. But its Achilles heel is the fact that it's expensive on the front end to get up off the ground. So this bill does a number of things to try and reduce those costs on the front end, and then long term be able to allow it simply to operate at market rates, just like any other power system.
Gotcha. Talk to me about some of those other measures to make it kind of affordable on the front end.
Sure. So the one you mentioned already, there's the tax credit. So that's directly related to the amount of power that they are producing, and that would basically allow for it depends on the size of the plant and how much power they're producing, of course. But if it was one of the 1,000 megawatt generators, which they are talking about smaller ones, but I think they're going to build some larger ones too. I think they're going to build the 1,000 megawatts because there's so much need for power. So we'll see. I don't want to micromanage that. Let the industries figure that out. And so we target this by the megawatt hour and don't say which one to pick. But if it was a 1,000 megawatt generator, the result of this would be over the course of 20 years, they would get $150 million in tax credits. And these are, once again, this is a non-refundable tax credit. And so theoretically, if they're not actually making money or whatever, we're not just handing them money. It's simply reducing the tax burden that the company is paying. So that's the first thing that it does. Another thing that it does is it allows for the costs that a utility incurs related to pre-certification. So the nuclear power industry, a lot more so even than any other power source, although it's true to an extent with other ones, but this one's so much more. There's a lot of research and work that goes in on the front end before you can even start construction. And so you have to do site research, and you have to do permitting there, and you have to go through all these processes at the federal level as well as the state level. And so that can incur millions of dollars before you even put a shovel in the ground and start digging to lay a foundation. So this will allow, another part of the bill would allow for the utilities to immediately start recovering some of those costs on the front end. Now, there's pros and cons to that, and some people have said that that's a negative, but I think it's a positive because they say, well, you start paying the cost before you see the benefit of it. And that there is some truth to that. But what they're not forgetting is sooner or later, those costs are going to be recuperated by those utilities. Mm-hmm. And by allowing it to be paid out at the beginning, one, it's not just money that's spent, and then, if it's a loan or whatever, there's interest being incurred. But even aside from that, you're gonna pay it out over, say, 20 years or 30 years, as opposed to waiting a decade while the construction is ongoing and then finally start to recuperate the cost. It's like the difference between paying, 10 years, a 10-year mortgage versus, say, a 30-year mortgage. It's going to be a much smaller dollar amount on the impact on the average ratepayer. So Could it have a slight impact? It could, but it's better to have a small impact for 30 years than it is to have a much larger impact, over 10 years, say.
Okay.
So that's another key piece to allow that. Plus, we believe that it might enable. So there's things going on at the federal level related to nuclear power. They're talking about allowing for monies to be matching funds related to feds will put in some money, and then the locals or the state has to match that in some way, but we don't have the details of that yet. But we believe that that may also allow, because of that money that could be recuperated right away, we are getting some indication that that might be able to be the money that is counted to then capture the federal dollars as well, possibly,
Okay.
because that could be our 25% that we put in and then get the other 75% from the feds. We don't know it for sure because they haven't run the details yet. We may not get it for a little while yet, but we believe that that's a possibility as well, in addition to the other benefit.
Gotcha. And this would be for nuclear specifically.
Nuclear specifically, yes.
Okay. All right. You mentioned in your testimony, when I kind of heard you first testify about this in December, that this bill had a kind of a long gestation period.
Yes.
I guess, what did it take for legislatures to start, taking nuclear power seriously?
Yeah, the legislator, the governor. This has been. I will give credit where credit is due. That I was thankful that the last President Biden did show his support for nuclear power, and I think what he did by doing that is he kind of empowered other Democrats to also take that step. Because here the thing is about nuclear power. Scientifically speaking, nuclear power's biggest problem has never been science or cost. Nuclear power's biggest Achilles heel has always been politics, uh, most strongly from the Democratic side of the aisle. There's just been a very significant resistance to nuclear power for decades now from the Democratic side of the aisle. When President Biden showed his support for nuclear power, and I think he even mentioned the State of the Union, if I remember correctly, uh, all of a sudden, a whole bunch of other Democrats who privately and quietly supported nuclear power felt that they could finally say the same thing too. It's a little frustrating because it's like, you should be able to think on your own 2 feet and come to your own conclusions, and they'll say, I support this even if my party leaders don't.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, this really, I think, cleared the way for not all of them, but a significantly number of Democrats to join the Republicans in supporting nuclear power. And now with the advent of significant increased demand of power over the next decade or two because of data centers and things like that, we need to find a source. And so the practical, obvious choice for everybody that we can agree on really is nuclear power. And it's been great that as we've been working on this, and we kept the governor's office involved, we kept the ranking Democrat member on the Assembly Committee involved, and so it's been the unions have been involved, the power companies have been involved. We even had discussions with some of the conservationist groups, the environmentalist groups. They're not 100% on board, but I think they're still kind of stuck in the mindset where a lot of Democrats have been for a couple of decades and are a little bit behind the times. And so it's been a challenge to make sure we're all in a good place. But I'm telling you, I'm feeling really good about this bill. I really do think like we're going to get it done. I think we're going to get the governor signed. I mean, he told me point blank when I was in his office the other day for a different bill, put it on his desk, he'll sign it. I mean, he told me that point blank to my face himself personally told me that. So unless something else up, where we have one or two more tweaks we're still working on. Democrats asked for one thing. I gotta run it by our caucus to see if we're all good with it. But I think we'll be okay with it. So I think we're in a good place. And this would be fantastic. I would love for Wisconsin to be the leader for nuclear power. I think we are positioned well with our UW nuclear science program, nuclear engineering program, and I think we're well positioned with the climate that we're in. We can not only power our own data centers and power our own economy, which right now we're importing power, but I think if we do this right, we could be the powerhouse and provide it for other states as well. I think that would be the best case scenario I could see about the whole data revolution thing. I'm not a huge fan of data centers personally, but the idea that we are powering those in Illinois and Indiana and Michigan and Minnesota, that's a fantastic idea to me. I'd love to build power plants here and ship that power off to Illinois and Indiana.
Sure. Overtake Illinois for having the most nuclear power plants, that kind of thing.
I want us to lead the country. We have the potential. I will say that this bill, there could be other states that have done something in the meantime I'm not aware of, but at least when we were putting the bill together, I do not believe that there is another state that is as supportive of nuclear power as what we're going to get done through this bill, through the two bills we already passed, and possibly as we move forward. Probably not going to be this session because it was introduced later. But there was another bill that Fine and I did related to sales tax credits. There was other parts of it too, but the sales tax related to actual construction materials. But we can get that done next session anyways because that's about actual physical construction, and it'll take a couple of years of all the planning ahead of time that my current bill deals with. And so we have time to get the actual construction material costs reduced. And so we'll be look at a bill like that next session probably. And I believe we will be the leader in the country. I'm hopeful that we will be the leader in the country for nuclear power.
Yeah. I appreciate you bringing up data centers.
Yeah.
And I think, as you made it clear there and in your testimony when I heard you speak, you're not a huge fan. And there are a lot of people in Wisconsin who are leery of data centers and this massive sort of, push for more energy. Now, I understand there's, a provision in the bill that, you have said will see to it that, ratepayers are not paying for some data center a few blocks over. Talk to me about how that's going to work.
Yeah, so in my bill, specifically what that's referring to is the ability of putting in what's called tariffs. Now, a lot of people think of tariffs as this, importing from Mexico or Canada or China or something, and a tax kind of just tossed on the import. That's not what electrical tariffs are. Electrical tariffs are basically an agreement that is worked out with the Public Service Commission, the PSC, and the electricity provider and the user, the consumer. Typically, this is going to be for large users. Well, it's always going to be for large users. It could be for a paper mill. It could be for a foundry, not an iron foundry, any of these kinds of things. This one, in order to qualify for that, there's certain you have to have a large amount enough of electricity you're using in order to qualify for these tariffs. The idea of them is, look, if you're buying huge amounts of electricity, maybe you don't need to pay a higher rate. You can, it's kind of like buying in bulk. You can, have, hey, we're going to buy this and you can depend on this amount of electricity we're going to buy from you. Can we get it at this rate? And so the utilities can kind of, plan for that, right? And so that's the idea. This establishes a new tier, so it'd have to be a very large user of electricity, which is pretty much data centers, and allows it kind of streamlines the process that the PSC would approve it, so long as the provider is in agreement, and the user is in agreement, the data center is in agreement, so long as it doesn't interfere. Does not push any costs onto residential ratepayers, and as long as it's within a certain distance, and that was actually key. And the utilities kind of raised an eyebrow when they saw that, like, what's the point of that? The point of that is, I don't want unnecessary, and I think the people of Wisconsin do not want unnecessary transmission lines built across our state, especially the really large ones. It's one thing for the power lines that are running to your homes. They don't really interfere with anything. But when you're talking about the amounts of power we are talking about, those are very large power lines with thousands of megawatts being run through these. And we want to make sure that we're minimizing that as much as possible. So we're providing that streamlined process so long as they are locating within a relatively short distance. Now, it's 70 miles. That sounds like a lot. But we try to not be too restricted, because the idea is we don't want it being, the power necessarily just being produced in, Two Rivers and then being, have to build a big transmission line across to, Beaver Dam. Beaver Dam's talking about putting in a data center. We don't want to, we would prefer that we would construct things that are closer together to minimize that as much as possible. And that's just good for a number. It's not only the impact on, the fields and the right of ways and everything that's going to be entailed with that, but it helps with the grid as well, because the grid is already nearing, it's not there yet, but it's nearing capacity for how much you can run across it. We can't necessarily afford it to simply do it right now and then send it across the state. We're going to have to build transmission lines, and it will be better for our ratepayers, better for the people of Wisconsin, if in fact any additional power lines that have to be built, are minimized as much as possible.
Sure. Less cost of construction.
And it's a huge cost of people don't realize how much of a cost of your electricity is not the cost of the actual production of the electricity. It's how much does it cost to be, let's take Point Beach nuclear power plant. It has a certain amount of costs to make it at Point Beach. And then it has to be sent across the lines. There's not only the construction of the lines, there's the maintenance of the lines. And in addition to that, you have power loss. As you send power across power lines, you lose some of that electricity. It just happens. And the further you have to go, the more electricity you lose. And so minimizing that as much as possible is better for everybody involved. And so we tried to basically just create that incentive, say, hey, we'll kind of give you a kind of a streamlined regulatory process if you keep it as close as you can.
That was Representative Shae Sortwell. Thank you again to Representative Sortwell, to Spectrum for sponsoring this production, and to you, the listener, for tuning in. I'm Joshua Irvin with WizPolitics.